The next speaker is the Honorable Clement Rohee. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I have plenty past, but I'm the number one boss.
Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that we're dealing here with a much more profound question than it appears on the surface in respect of the motion that is before us. And I want to say that we started by talking about the election violence that took place during the last elections. But the more profound question is, what are we living with now? What has resulted in the long term, or the medium and long term, from the issues that we're seeking to grapple with here. And it would seem to me, Mr. Speaker, that the resistance to the motion, which we get in a sense is what is emanating from the government benches, and which most likely will result in the opposing passage of the motion, is part and parcel of the dispensation that has arisen from these elections. Therefore, the question is, where is this taking us as a country? Mr. Speaker, I think we must not only talk about the violence or the electoral violence that took place on this particular day, but we must reflect on the events of that day and come to grips with where it is taking us as a country and as a people. My question that is linked to this issue, which I believe this Parliament must seek to grapple with, and which this nation must seek to grapple with, Mr. Speaker, is, where is the unreasonableness? What is unreasonable in the three issues that are embedded in the three be it resolved clauses? First issue is compensation for victims, not anything for the People's Progressive Party. We're not asking for anything for the People's Progressive Party. We don't need anything from the government benches in respect of what arose from the election. We don't. We are talking here about victims. Now, whether you want to politicize, as they're seeking to do, the honorable members and the government benches are seeking to do, to politicize the consequences that arose from the electoral violence vis-a-vis these victims, well, that is a matter which they have to deal with. So the first issue here is the compensation issue. Where is the unreasonableness in requesting compensation for victims of electoral violence? That's number one. The second question is, where is the unreasonableness in the request for the government to meet with the victims and to consult with them? We're not asking the government benches to meet with the PPP and to consult with us. We're not. We're asking the government, or we're urging the government, to meet with the victims and to consult with them. What is unreasonable about that, Mr. Speaker?
Nothing.
I believe that in the best interest of this country, it is better to dialogue than to confront. What is inherent in this be it resolved clause, Mr. Speaker, is a request for dialogue. Meet with the victims, and consult with them. Now, the final be it resolved clause, Mr. Speaker, asks the government to submit a report to the House on what came out of the consultations. What is wrong with that? What is unreasonable about this?
Nothing.
What is so unreasonable? Are we taking this issue to such a degree that we cannot recognize the reasonableness or the unreasonableness in this motion, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, you know, we tend to put what is called the plague on both houses. Put the plague on both houses. But where is that going to take us as a country? The PPP to be blamed, the government, APNU, AFC to be blamed. Where is that going to take us? It will only take us into this syndrome of the blame game. And we are back where we started. We're back where we started. There's no movement. And so the question, Mr. Speaker, that this motion here, the profundity of this motion, begs the question, where are we going as a nation? Where are we going as a nation? And to understand the depth of the issues which are inherent in this motion, Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that the debate, particularly coming from the government benches, because our position is quite clearly spelled out here. We are asking for 3 elements of reasonableness. 3 elements of reasonableness in this motion, Mr. Speaker. And the politicization that has taken place in the House, especially from the government benches, Mr. Speaker, is rather disappointing. Mr. Speaker, both sides make reference to the question of they want to protect the votes. The People's Progressive Party, Civic, has a vested interest in ensuring that its supporters' votes are secure. The APNU AFC has a vested interest in ensuring that the votes that they receive are secured as well. The question, Mr. Speaker, is in seeking that type of security, what is electoral security, does the answer lie in resorting to electoral violence? Clearly, the answer cannot lie in resorting to electoral violence. The human factor, Mr. Speaker, the human factor that is so beautifully reflected in this motion, calling for the 3 elements of reasonableness, but the government appears to be rejecting, Mr. Speaker, is a backward step for this country. Backward step. Mr. Speaker, before the elections, all the parties signed a code of conduct. All the parties contesting the elections signed a code of conduct. There is not a shred of evidence that can attest that the People's Progressive Party ever initiated any type of violence at public meetings organized by the APNU and the AFC. If they have it, let them publish it. If they have it, let them publish it. And if they have the names of the persons who were involved in such type of activities, I encourage them to report it to the nearest police station. But it's not there. It's not there. So, Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, we sat in this house, and I will quote from a speech that we all listened to. And I'm sure when I read it, everybody will recognize where it came from. And this is what it says. Our Ministry of Social Cohesion, a ministry within the Ministry of the Presidency, will continue its arduous work to reinforce national unity. We can be one nation only if all sections of our population feel that they share in our country's economic development. We must, in 2016, dispel enmity among individuals and groups. We must move forward as a united nation. Mr. Speaker, end of quote. Is this resistance to these three calls for reasonableness going to contribute to the realization of these lofty objectives? It is not, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully submit. And so this position is virtually undermining a position that all of us stand for. But it is not happening. Not happening. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Felix dealt at length in a number of issues. I wouldn't go into all of the things that he spoke about. But someone, I think, three of our speakers so far quoted from Bob Marley. But I'm going to quote also from him. With your permission, Mr. Speaker. He throw his corn, but he ain't carry no foul. He throw his corn, but he ain't carry no foul. And he know exactly why he couldn't carry no foul. Mr. Speaker, his case to oppose this motion is built on the question of suspicion. Typical police behavior. Typical police behavior. I've worked with them for years. And everyone is a suspect except themselves. Suspicion. Two elements of suspicion. Number one, that the house was used as an illegal polling station. And number two, it had ballot boxes there. Mr. Speaker, Winston, you said that, man, don't doubt it. I make copious notes when you speak.
I did say, Mr. Speaker, you rise on Standing Order 40, I'm correcting an inaccuracy. 40A, I can recall repeating a statement made by Honorable Joseph Hamilton when he said the crowd said, we vote. That is what I said.
You said many things. You said many things.
I'm responding to that. That is where the inaccuracy is. I quoted from Mr. Hamilton, Honorable Member.
I thank the honourable member for his statement.
May I, Mr. Speaker?
Please seek to correct any
Mr. Speaker.
misapprehension, misunderstanding, or mispresentation.
Sir, I've been sitting in this house for years, and I'm in the habit of making notes.
Honourable member, you are giving me a speech.
No, I'm not misrepresenting.
I've asked you to do something.
What is that?
To correct any error, misrepresentation, misunderstanding, or anything that you have done, and then proceed.
I support your call, sir, but I can assure you, with the deepest respect, there has been no misrepresentation or error. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, so the element of suspicion is what created the combustion in the electoral system at Sophia. And instead of trying to diffuse the situation, having arrived there with busloads to add to what is already there, it's like adding fuel to fire. It's like adding fuel to fire, Mr. Speaker. We heard reports about Molotov cocktails being thrown. We heard reports about arson, bottles and bricks raining down and so forth. In a sense, an atmosphere of terror began to prevail. But Mr. Speaker, if I may crave the indulgence of the House, we on this side of the House are not strangers to this situation. 1968, 1973, 1980, 1985, and 1993. All through the annals of electoral history in this country, there has been electoral violence by the poor losers. The PPP, quote unquote, lost these elections thanks to the rigging that we said took place. But the PPP didn't resort to any violence or street demonstrations or anything like this. We haven't done so. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I want to make is that this question of electoral violence in 2015 must not be seen in isolation. It has to be seen in the context. There's a context in which it took place. And usually, this type of electoral violence is centrally directed. The Honorable Member himself admitted, and Honorable Member Mr. Edhill stated that these actions were not spontaneous. There was no spontaneity about these actions in respect to this Sophia incident. And therefore the history of rigged elections in Guyana, Mr. Speaker, the history of electoral violence in this country is coming all the way down. And that's why I asked the question. We need to determine what are the steps that are necessary to put an end to this situation that faces our country at every elections, especially when the People's Progressive Party garners the majority of votes, and when there are others who feel that they were deprived of the votes when it proven that it was not so. Honorable Member asked the question in kind of a rhetorical way. The people were asking how the PPP got so many votes at Sophia. But this question was asked in 1992 in terms of the entire country. Because the party that lost the elections could not recognize that there were people or there were electors other than those who supported the PPP that voted for the PPP. Bar Jagdeo, the Honorable Member, is 1997, I believe it, no, not 1997, 2001, was able to garner much more votes in the history of the elections of this country. And how did that happen? Is it because we rigged the elections? So, Mr. Speaker, the point I want to make here is that
you have 3 minutes more.
Yes, the accusation about rigged this. Moses, the Honorable Member should talk about elections. He shouldn't speak about that here at all, Mr. Speaker. So, I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that we on this side of the House want to appeal to the government benches.
Irrelevant.
Not to reject,
Irrelevant.
not to reject
People reject
the
you all
three
different.
be it resolved clauses, which speaks to compensation,
These are-
which speaks to meeting and consulting with the victims,
You're a curmudgeon.
and this speaks to submitting the report to this honorable.
You're a curmudgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I have in my hand here a report from iNews,
You're a curmudgeon.
and it says here, headlines, government may soon settle on financial compensation for E-Day violence victims. It said that, Mr. Speaker, if I may quote, after several calls from various segments of the population, it seems as if the APNU AFC government has finally decided to offer some form of financial compensation to the victims of the violence that flooded several communities on Election Day, May 2015. Mr. Speaker, we weren't able to confirm this, but maybe the honorable members on that side of the House can confirm whether this is true or not, Mr. Speaker. I rest my case, Mr. Speaker, on the appeal to the honorable members on that side of the House
Support.
not to behave or not to demonstrate this unreasonableness, the three reasonable demands reflected in the three be it resolved clause, that the victims are not the PPP. The victims be granted some form of compensation, that they be invited to consult and to meet with them, and to thirdly, to prepare a report and come to this honorable House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.